was Al-Bukhari? Al-Bukhari, his name was Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ismail ibn Ibrahim ibn Mughira ibn Bardizbah al-Ju'fi al-Ju'fi mawlahum al-Bukhari. His actual name is Muhammad. His name is Muhammad, father's name Ismail, and grandfather's name Ibrahim. So very easy to memorize. Muhammad ibn Ismail ibn Ibrahim, and his great-grandfather Mughira was the one who converted to Islam. And Mughira converted to Islam during the lifetime of the Sahaba. The Sahaba, they conquered the province of Khurasan. And Khurasan is in modern Afghanistan and Iran. It is in a province that is modern day Iran and Afghanistan. So Bukhari is actually from the province of Bukhara, or in that land Mawara an-Nahr, which is in English is called Transoxania, and this is the land which is now in modern day Iran. So Bukhari was a Persian. Bukhari was a Persian, and he obviously had the features of a Persian, and he spoke Persian as his mother language. So the language he was fluent in was Persian. And Arabic, of course, he was fluent in, but it was an acquired language. And it was not the language he spoke basically at home. And then Al-Bukhari, and Al-Bukhari means he was from the city of Bukhara. So we say Imam Al-Bukhari is not even his name. It is his nisba, where is his city? And in those days, they would ascribe a person both to his blood and to his city.
In terms of the day that he was born on either the 12th or 13th of Shawwal in the year 194. 12th or 13th of Shawwal, 194, which was the day of Jum'ah, which was the day of Jum'ah. In terms of his birth, there's nothing miraculous that was narrated in terms of what happened to him. But what we do know about his early childhood is two key events. Number one, that his father passed away when he was very, very young. He was very young and his father passed away. And number two, Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, he actually went blind at the age of 3. He actually went blind at the age of 3. Now let us get into his parents, and we're going to tie all these points together. His mother, we do not know too much about her. But what we do know about her is that she was someone that used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regularly. She was an abida. Like, she loved worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what had happened was when Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah lost his eyesight at the age of 3, she had dedicated herself that I'm going to continue praying tahajjud and qiyamul layl every single night and making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returns his eyesight, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returns his eyesight.
Then a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happens. And keep in mind here, Al-Bukhari was not blind for just a month or two. Al-Bukhari was blind for a significant amount of time. It could have been 2 or 3 years that he was blind. His mother never gave up hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She continued to make dua. And one night as she's sleeping, she sees Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam comes to her and says to her, Ya hadihi, O so-and-so, Inna Allah yubashiruki, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the glad tidings, Annahu qad radda basaru waladik, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has restored the eyesight of your child, li kathrati du'aik. And actually says to her, Ibrahim says to her, because of your dua. Ibrahim alayhi salam says to her, Allah has restored the sight of your child because of your dua. She wakes up, she goes to Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, and as she wakes him up, he opens his eyes and he's looking around, clearly seeing, confused, how is it that he can see and what's going on here, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered that dua. And this is significant because we owe the entire legacy of Imam al-Bukhari to his mother, to the dua of a mother. Now, there are a few stories about him when he was a child, all right, to show you how incredible of a memory he had. First, one of the scholars that he studied with was a man by the name of Al-Imam Ad-Dakhili. Al-Imam Ad-Dakhili, rahimahullah ta'ala. And Ad-Dakhili was considered like one of the most prominent hadith scholars in Bukhara. And Ad-Dakhili, he used to write in his own lawh. He used to have his own scrolls and he used to write his own ahadith. And one day, Al-Bukhari is sitting there. Al-Bukhari was only 11 years old, okay? And he says, حدثنا سفيان عن أبي الزبير عن إبراهيم. So he's going through the chain of narrators. Al-Bukhari raises his hand. He says, Ya Shaykh, inna Abu Zubair lam yarwi an Ibrahim. He said, Shaykh, Abu Zubair has never met Ibrahim. So what are you talking about? Of course he has. And he insisted. Al-Bukhari was like, no, they've never even met. And he says, are you sure what you're talking about? And he got infuriated. Dakhili is like, who's this 11-year-old kid trying to show me up in a halaqah and tell me that these two hadith narrators never met? So he was really mad. He said, Sayyidi, irja' ila al-asl. He said, you know, my master, go ahead and go back to your origin. Because al-lawh, al-dakhili, he used to copy his lawh from all of his notes. He used to put it together for his classes. So he said, go back and see the original copy and see if you find that. So al-dakhili, he made the entire halaqah sit there while he went home, went through his scrolls so he could find that hadith and find that chain, and he could come back to him. So here's al-Bukhari. All the other students are mad at him because they just have to sit there and they're not even getting any ahadith. They're just waiting for their teacher to come back, and he's all angry to figure out, you know, whether this 11-year-old kid has a point. So al-Dakhili comes back laughing, and he says to al-Bukhari, he says, Ya waladi, you know, oh my son. He says, فَحَدَثَ عَنْ مَنْ إِذًا. So then who did he narrate from? Then what's the correct chain of narrators? Like, how did you figure that out? So he said to him, he says that Sufyan عن الزبير عن عدي عن إبراهيم. So al-Bukhari gave him the correct chain. He's 11 years old. قال صدقت ونعم الغلام أنت. He said, you know, you've told the truth, and what a bright young man you are. وَسَيَكُونُ لَكَ شَأْنٌ. And he looked at him, he said, you're going to have a special status in this ummah. Like, you've got a bright future ahead of you. So Dakhili was actually relieved at that. He was very impressed by him. Now al-Bukhari sees a dream when he's a child as well, when he's a young teenager as well, that many would actually see of him. Many ulama would see this dream, and al-Bukhari saw. Al-Bukhari saw a dream of himself walking behind the Prophet ﷺ. Every time the Prophet ﷺ puts his foot down, al-Bukhari goes and puts his foot down there. And he saw this dream of himself as a young man. And subhanAllah, other ulama, other scholars as well, they saw that dream.
At the age of 16, his mother and older brother and him, they go for Hajj. And during that time, Hajj season and Mecca overall was the international university of Muslims. Because in those days, there is no 2-week visa, you have to go and come back. If you're going to go for Hajj and you're coming from Andalus, do you think you're going to sit there for 5 days? You might live there for 5 years. Because this is your one and only lifetime. It'll take you 2 years to go from Andalus to Mecca. You really think you're going to spend 2 weeks in Mecca? You're going to stay there months, years, maybe even, right? And what do you think the scholars are going to do when they're living in Mecca? They will benefit and narrate. And so Mecca was considered to be, for many centuries, the primary international Islamic university, where all the famous scholars in the world would be narrating fiqh and hadith and aqidah and whatever else is going on. They're all having their halaqat. So Imam al-Bukhari, at the age of 16, he sees all of this. He is dazzled. This is a dream come true. And he begs his mother, you go back with my brother, let me stay here. He wasn't planning to do this when he left Bukhara, but now that he gets to Mecca, he sees what he wants to do. So his mother, with his blessings, with her blessings, allows him to remain in Mecca. And so he never returned permanently to Bukhara until the end of his life, as we just studied. And at the age of 18, he authored his first book. 18 years old, and he writes his first book. And this book, in now printed version, and I have it at home, it is in 9 thick volumes. This thick. Now what have we done at the age of 18? And Imam al-Bukhari writes a book which is one of the most advanced books or subjects possible, and that is Ilm al-Rijal, or the science of men. To this day, scholars of hadith use this as a primary reference for figuring out the names, biographies, places. For Bukhari to have written this at the age of 18 shows us that he has mastered this field, and that the other fields of hadith are now basically already within his grasp, because this is the most advanced knowledge of hadith. Of his greatest honors and privileges was he traveled to Baghdad, and in Baghdad at the time was the greatest scholar of hadith alive, and that is Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And so Bukhari studied with Imam Ahmad when he was barely in his 20s, and Imam Ahmad remarked a very poignant, a very powerful thing about Imam Ahmad is now in his 70s, 60, 70 years old. Bukhari is, 20s. Imam Ahmad said, I have never seen from the entire province of Khurasan someone like Muhammad ibn Ismail. Now Khurasan is one of the largest provinces of the empire at the time. And Imam Ahmad says, I have never met anybody from this entire province like Muhammad ibn Ismail. Scholars say Imam Ahmad restricted himself to Khurasan because Bukhari is still in his 20s. Had he met Bukhari later on, then he wouldn't have to restrict himself only to Khurasan. So he's meeting Bukhari when Bukhari is still a young man, Imam Ahmad is the undisputed champion of hadith, and he is saying in the entire province, what is Khurasan? Khurasan is parts of Iraq, all of Iran, Afghanistan, this is all Khurasan, right? So he's saying in this entire province, I have not yet met anybody, scholar or student, the likes of Imam al-Bukhari.
Was Imam al-Bukhari married? Did he have children? As you mentioned earlier, Allah knows best, difference of opinion on this issue, but it doesn't seem that Imam al-Bukhari got married or had any children.
And we learn from the books of biography of Imam al-Bukhari that Imam al-Bukhari had what we now call a photographic memory. This is something we have now documented. It is now something science has proven. We know people who have photographic memories. Clearly, Imam al-Bukhari had photographic memory, that he only needed to see a hadith once and he never needed the notes again. And Ibn Kathir writes he would just read a page once and that page would be memorized with him for as long as he lived. And this is something that in his own lifetime people began to doubt, how is this possible? His memory was so amazing that in his own lifetime, scholars who were far senior to him began to say these are rumors, these are legends, these are fairy tales. And on multiple times, scholars put him to the test in public and quizzed him in public. And of the most famous tests done of Imam al-Bukhari was when he was in his 30s. And he revisited Baghdad after Imam Ahmad passed away. He revisited Baghdad. Now his scholarship has now spread around the world. Everybody has heard of Bukhari. And wallahi, it's an amazing thing at the time for somebody in his 30s to have such a reputation. And the scholars of Baghdad said, this guy clearly, his followers have made him bigger than he is. So we will demonstrate once and for all that there's more hype to the man than really there is the man. What did they do? They told Imam al-Bukhari, let us all meet in the grand masjid of Baghdad. Baghdad has the famous masjid, the Masjid al-Jami' al-Kabir, the big masjid, and we will narrate 10 hadith, all of us, for our students to benefit from. And this was common at the time, that all scholars come together, you give 10, you give 10, you give 10, and they'll all take notes, and mashallah, tabarakallah, the students get the luxury of multiple, sheikhs giving multiple hadith. But they had tricked, or they wanted to trick Bukhari. And what they wanted to do was to mix and match the chain of narrators called isnad with the matan, with the actual text, and to put the wrong matan with another isnad, so that outwardly it would appear that this hadith looks reasonable because A narrates from B, narrates from C, narrates from D, that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. But the fact of the matter, A, B, C, D didn't narrate إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Rather, E, F, G, H narrated إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. You see what I'm saying here? Is that the isnad cut, the matan cut and pasted together, and you concoct a new hadith. Now, for the scholars of hadith, they don't just look at إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. They look at the chain going back. And if the chain is different, guess what? This is called a different hadith. For us, miskeen, us basic people, we just care about إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. We don't care about the chains. For the scholars of hadith, if there's a different chain, it's considered a different hadith. So, each one of the 10 mixed and matched all of their 10. And the first of them began, Bukhari is sitting there, and he quotes the first hadith. And it's, for the student's perspective, a famous hadith. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Let's say, we don't know the actual 100, but it's a famous hadith. All the students have heard إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. So he mentions the first hadith, a different isnad. Then he asked Bukhari, do you have this hadith? Imam Bukhari says, no, I never heard this hadith. Now for the students, this is the most obvious hadith in the world. Bukhari is saying he's never heard it. The second hadith, again Bukhari says, I've never heard this. The third, the fourth, all 10, and these basic students know all 10. And Bukhari is saying, I've never heard these 10. Then the next 10 begins with the next sheikh. Then the next 10, until finally all 100 have been done, and Bukhari has admitted he is jahil for all 100 of them. So clearly they believe they have won now, right? Because by the way, if Bukhari had said he has heard of them, it would have exposed him. These hadith don't exist. You made a mistake, right? At least he's saying he's not heard of them, but now he really looks like a jahil, that he hasn't heard anything. Then when they're finished, Bukhari has said, are you guys done? They said yes. So he said, okay, as for you, back to the first one. Your first hadith was A, B, C, D, E, F, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. It is incorrect. It should be E, F, G, H, I, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. And then he began with the second, and he corrected. Then the third, and he corrected. All the way till he regurgitated 100 incorrect hadith, and he corrected every single one of them. Ibn Hajar, the famous commentator of Bukhari, who died 852, so many centuries after Bukhari, Ibn Hajar said, what is amazing is not that Imam al-Bukhari knew the right hadith. We would expect this from a hadith master. We would expect it. That he knows it's not A, B, C, D, E, it's rather E, F, G, H, I. We expect this. What is amazing is that he memorized the incorrect versions and the order that they appeared after having only listened to them once. And this is a live test done in the entire Masjid of Baghdad with all of the thousands of students there, that Imam al-Bukhari's memory was tested, and these scholars clearly realized the hype is true and the man truly meets up that hype.